Quad 66. New frame day. It's kind of exciting. So this frame that I've been working on, and I think I just got these back. These are prototypes from CNC Madness, but I think they're going to be good to go, and I'm going to pop them up on Armatan. So the point of these frames is, well, at least two out of them is to go with this type of a build here. And so with this type of build, what you're doing is you're taking the 1S board, you're rotating it 45 degrees, and then kind of slamming and tucking the camera down back in there, and getting a really like low frontal profile, and it's sort of the fast ultralight build. And so that's these two frames here, and then one of the regular kind of Webster style or toothpick style frames here. So the updates on it, I'm going to start with the one that's sort of my current. So this current build, which is going to be take a lightweight F1 board, and so this is the Beta FPV board. I'm also really interested about the newbie drone board coming out, specifically their 1S board. But basically taking that and building it up with 1102s, high KV 1102s. So these are the GIP RC 14,000. And I think these are better motors. As I put in more time, I'll have a better sense whether they are better than the Happy Model 1102 EX 1102s. But taking those and then using these nice, easy to spin props, these are the Who Cares, which have been the most consistent that I've found in terms of, they're the most forgiving with these motors. They're a little bit dodgy, questionable. And so for this type of a build, this build comes in just under 26 grams dry weight. And so if you're targeting, and this is with a heavier, I guess it's probably about 0.75 grams heavier. So you're targeting, about 25 gram, 26 gram builds. I guess there's some motor wire can chop down there too. But so that's the point of this frame. So some of the features behind this frame is that, throw up this white paper behind there, kind of make this jump out a little bit better. So what I have on here is this universal mount, so it natively fits these 3-hole, and you can see that it also has the extra holes that if you want to mount the 4-hole type motor, so like 1103s, you can. It's just going to be rotated 45 degrees, and that makes the wiring a little bit messy, but it works so that it's not a throwaway frame if you want to try those other motors. And the holes here are the 25 by 0.5 by 25.5 for the FC, and then there's a little shelf for the camera to sit on. You can see on this one wasn't designed for that, so I had to use these little zip ties and things like that, and that's also some of the excess weight on this comes from. So with that, you get that little perch, and particularly with a camera like this, you can tuck it in. Beta FPV also came out with a brand new one. It's a true 1/3 CMOS, at least according to their specs, which is going to be narrow and should be able to tuck in like that. It's going to be a little bit taller, but I don't think it'll be a big issue. Or for the new RunCam Nano 3, you're not going to be able to tuck it in like this, but it's got this real small, or it has a real small lens on it, so I think your prop clearance and things like that are going to be just fine. So with this, one of the challenges of these frames is you want to keep these nice intact fibers going lengthwise, and you can see I've got these cut in the direction of the fibers. I tried doing some things with using cutouts in different shapes and whatnot, but what I ultimately settled on was just overbuilding the area where the screw hole is. So the thickest point is right around that screw hole, and then tapering as you come down to the arm. And so what you want, if I can kind of show this, is you want to control the flex, where if you're flexing it, that the flex kind of goes through the whole arm. There's not one stress riser. Obviously when the board is on here, it's going to shore up this area a little bit here. And so with that, the natural stress riser is right there, and that's why this is going to be the thickest right at that point. There's also a natural stress riser just proximal to the motor mounts, and that's why this area here is a little bit thicker as well. So with this, and then other things about this, I guess keeping the arms, pretty narrow, so that you minimize kind of how much drag you're creating by putting, you know, big fat arms underneath the props and things like that. And so with this, it's still coming in very light, and this may actually be lighter than some people will want. And so this is on 1.5 millimeter thick, and with that I'm coming in just under 2. So this is coming in at 2.22, so about 2 1/4, 2.25 grams. And so what my plan is to put this up in options for if you want the ultralight one and you're willing to take the chance of breaking it, which it probably will break if you smash it into stuff, you know, pretty hard. But if you want the ultralight, you can get it in 1.5 millimeters. If you want something that's going to come in around 3 grams, then you just bump it up to 2 millimeter thick. And with 2 millimeter thick, you're going to get something that's, you know, quite a bit more rigid and robust with, you know, small weight penalty, and that's the trade-off that you can make. So that's the idea behind this. The length of this motor mount to motor mount is 114 millimeters, so this will be called the 114. And what that does is it gives you a nice amount of clearance with props if you're using the 65 millimeter props, and also gets the battery a fair amount of clearance underneath. It also works if you want to throw the 3-inch props. You can see that there's enough clearance there to where if you throw a 3-inch prop, it's still going to work. So that's why I stretched this out from 110 up to 114, but it's still intended mainly to be run on the 65 millimeter props. It's supposed to be light. It's not supposed to be the durable basher, but maximizing performance in that way. So most nimble. Okay, then also in 114, so there's going to be the 114 Webster. And so this one, basically the arms are the same deal, and it's the same thing where we kind of have the tapering of the arms. You can see that the thickest point is going to come in right there where they're coming in, where there's going to be a natural stress riser, and kind of controlling the flex, so when it flexes, it kind of flexes through the whole thing rather than any kind of one spot. And specifically with this setup, that this guy here, if you go ahead and throw on your Whoop board into there, there should be enough clearance where all your plugs and stuff can pop out. So if you want to mount it in the native orientation, you should be able to. I personally prefer to flip the boards and pull the plugs and things like that and solder. And with this at 114, I think these GEP-RC motors, they've got longer wires, and those should reach with the plugs intact. But if you go with the Happy model on this 114, you may be a little bit tight on the wires. I haven't checked it. I guess I probably will at some point in time, but right now I just haven't. And so yeah, that's the point of this one. This one comes in at basically essentially the same way, 2.25 grams. So at 1.5 millimeters, you've got your ultra light version of it. The stiffness of it is pretty similar to this, where it's not going to be super stiff, but it's intended for a super light build. If you want to get this more stiff, robust version, then I'll do a 2 millimeter version of it, and so that's going to come in somewhere around 3 grams. Those are those two. Okay, so the 114s. Now let's talk about the 116. So Rugy's been talking about doing 1S 3-inch with bigger motors. We're not sure what those motors are, but they're probably 12 somethings. I think he said at one point in time they're going to be 4.3 gram motors, and that's intended to be run with 3-inch props, and it looks like even doing 3-inch tri-blades, which sounds a little nuts, but it may work. But anyways, the body is the same kind of concept here, but you can see that stuff is a little thicker in general. And this is also, I'll offer this one in 2 millimeter, and this is pretty darn stiff. I may throw up like a 2.5 millimeter also option. So just because, so if you're running, you know, bigger props, bigger motors, heavier weight, you just need it to be a little bit more robust. And so that's the point of this one. So this one has also, this is not going to be compatible with the 3-hole motors. This has got what I call these my Footie Mounts. To me, they look like little feet, so I call it the Footie. And what you can see is that they're just slightly off. I don't know if you can see that. They're just slightly off, perfectly like vertical. And so what that does, the way this is set up, is that even though the motor's twisted a little bit on there. The wiring, you can just a little touch to it and it comes straight down the shaft. But the reason for having this kind of funny orientation, and you can also see the screw holes are actually a little bit off center. But the reason to do that is that points these guys out, sort of where you're going to be smacking them into stuff rather than straight ahead. Also, it kind of gets you a cleaner line here where you're not going into like right angles. These angles are a little bit more swoopy. You can curve them a little bit more. Same thing here. I've got these arms where the thickest point is right there, and you can see they're curved all the way in. Again, it's got the little shelf. So this is going to be oriented for doing you know, this orientation, but with 3-inch props and slightly bigger motors. And this guy is coming in a little bit heavier, and I think it was 3.78, so 3.8 grams. So if we at 2mm thick, or yeah, this is 2mm thick, it's going to be 3.8 grams around there. And if you bump it up to 2.5, that's going to add, what is that? A quarter of your weight. I can't do the math in my head quick enough, but so it's going to put you somewhere in, you know, like 4 point, I think probably 4.5 gram range. Maybe it'll be under 5 gram. But so still pretty light, but definitely quite a bit beefier. This one also is going to work if you want to do in the heavier, you know, in the thicker, if you want to do 2S builds, but it's not for the mega size boards. So for example, the Beta FPV board and the Nameless RC board, they've got an oversized hole mounting. They're at 26.5 versus 25.5. And those boards, I don't really like them because of that, and also because the profile is bigger. It's quite a bit bigger. But there are some boards, 2S boards, that are going to be smaller or are smaller. So for example, it looks like the Diatone board, that one on the spec sheet looks like it's 25.5 by 25.5. Also, there's a Sky Stars board, which is looks pretty nice too. That's 25.5 by 25.5, and it's also got a little kind of like some. It sort of looks more like a regular Whoop board. What else? Beta FPV also has their silverware board, so that may be another option. So for super light 2S build, so if you want to go down that route, this will also be another nice option for that. Probably going to do a like 16 by 16 mount version of this, and also a Webster version of this. But this is what I ordered up from to have prototype cuts from CNC Madness, and these cuts came out nice. Pretty happy with them. So excited to build some up. And then part 2 of the video will be showing you the built-up versions and DVR and stuff. Because this is gone, holy cow, 13 minutes long. Too long already. All right, till next time, cheers.